Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about melodic lines that appear in the middle of a piano texture. Now, start off by listening to this little short 4-bar, 4-measure example that I've written. So that's what we're talking about. As you can hear and as you can see, we have a melodic line that is running through here in the middle of the piano texture. Now, it's often assumed that if there's a melody in a piano piece, well, surely it's going to be at the top in the highest sounding voice. And so you might have a piece that this one reorganized. And it may be that during a piece of this kind, some of the time the melody does appear at the top, but it's very possible that somewhere during the piece, the melody is going to move somewhere else in the texture. So this is an important issue, both for performers and for composers, and I want to try and address those two audiences, because many a time, particularly in the exam room over the decades, I've heard people play pieces of music like this without perhaps them realizing that the melody is in the middle of the texture. So either they just kind of don't focus that melody at all, or they're still thinking, well, the most important thing is at the top. So they kind of play. Now, if you play that piece like that, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I'm playing exactly the same notes, but I've now got a kind of emphasis on the top line, and we're thinking, what's going on here? There doesn't seem to be any kind of melody in this piece of music, and I've got this slightly kind of disjointed rhythm that's got all this attention being drawn to it. Whereas in fact, in this piece of music, all of the right-hand material throughout that passage is part of the accompaniment. So the bottom line here is just providing a bass line, the right hand is just providing the accompaniment, and the tune is here in this kind of tenor part. So if you are a performer, a pianist, you need to be well aware in any piece of music you're playing of where the melody is. So you need to have a good look at that and think, what is this going through the middle? It does seem to be the most important melodic line. Then you realise that this thing down the bottom is just the bass part. And so on, it's just providing a bass line. But all this stuff is just filling out chords, isn't it? It's not doing anything melodic at all. And apart from filling out the chords, it's giving us a bit of rhythmic interest because it's playing on the off beats, isn't it? It's providing chords in the right hand on the second half of a beat, on the second quaver or the second eighth note of a beat, and that kind of energizes the rhythm a little bit and is a nice contrast with that more singing cantabile melody in the tenor. So if you are a pianist, one thing you have to do is to learn how to balance the texture. So even though when you play this, you're going to have to think about how you organize it between the hands, because unless you've got the hugest hands on the planet, you will not be able to play those two notes in the left hand or these two notes. You're going to end up taking some of this stuff with the right hand. So some of this melody is going to be played in the right hand, some of it might be played in the left hand. It makes it slightly tricky to manage. So in a way, you're probably going to thumb out the melody a bit, and you're going to have to learn to play this melody louder than this stuff, which is not easy to do at first, because a lot of people will play and that top part will be too loud. So can we learn to play like that. So you get these notes to be subdued and these notes to be louder. So that takes a bit of practice, doesn't it? And you'll have to work out how it's possible to play this between your hands. So you might do something like this in terms of how you allocate this tenor melody between your hands. So right, 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 left, right, left, 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 right, 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 right. Do you see how I've done that? So most of the notes, in fact, have gone into the right hand, but actually there are times like this when the notes go into the left hand because it's impossible to put them in the right hand. So just because the notes are written in the bass clef doesn't mean you have to play them in the left hand. There's no kind of law about that. It's just you've got to work out how to play it. So there's the management of a middle voice like this that you have to think about. You end up doing lots of thumbs, so you've got to do it as legato as you can, and you've got to think about how the pedal works. So probably in this, the pedal's going to change at least whenever the bass notes change. You might decide some pedal changes need to be more frequent than that, but that's going to help with your sustain a little bit as well, because it's hard to get a fingering that's not hopping fingers a little bit in the middle there. But the most important thing is, how do you put emphasis on this without putting emphasis on that? So that needs a lot of practice. And then take this in the left hand and then back into the right hand, then back into the left. And you don't want to be able to hear when the hands change, but you've got to be able to balance all that out. So particular challenges for the player. Once you've cracked it in one piece, you'll have cracked it for life and you'll be able to do it everywhere else. But the important thing is to look through the piece and think, where is the melody at any given time? Looking out for places like this where the melody comes in the middle of the texture. So that's pianists trying to play this stuff. Now, composers, this is a great opportunity to vary your texture. Are you the kind of composer who always writes the melody at the top of the texture? And then maybe as you're writing longer pieces, you think, oh, this is getting a bit tedious. You know, how do I vary this now? Okay, so this is something you might want to think about. You may be the kind of composer who writes the melody at the top some of the time, writes the melody in the bass some of the time, but maybe doesn't think enough about writing in the middle. Now, if you're writing for orchestra or for some ensemble of instruments, in many ways, it's a bit easier to do it because you don't have all this, what do I play in which hand and how does it work? If you're writing for a keyboard instrument, piano in particular we're thinking about here, then you've really got to think practically about how could someone play this. So what I've just done, going through thinking what would be played in the right hand, what would be played in the left hand, you've got to ensure that that is possible. So that's an important thing from a composing point of view. You can't have a note in the middle of the texture that's so far away from the bass part that you can't play it in the left hand, but it's so far away from the right hand notes you can't play it in the right hand either, because what are you going to do? Play it with your nose? Well, that's one possibility, I suppose, but you know, it's got to be manageable. So you need to think about the practicalities of how you present that melody there. Also, worth making sure that, as you can see in this example, you've got plenty of space between this tenor melody and the bass line. Do you see big distances there? And what you might be tempted to do is to say, well, I've got to play all of this stuff in the left hand, and then you end up with your bass line getting kind of tangled up with your tenor melody. Imagine, for example, if I had this bass line an octave higher, well, it might work in the first bar, but then I've got this F sharp kind of colliding with this F sharp in the bass. Then in the next bar it goes to pop because it sort of starts off all right and then it comes down and then gets tangled up at this point with this bass note, and then the bass note's higher than the melody. So you see, we bump into all sorts of problems. If you end up by saying, well, I know what I'll do, I'll take this melody down an octave, well, then it's kind of rather dark and grumpy down there. The notes together. We've got some kind of things bumping into each other and crossing parts and things. And that doesn't enhance the mood either. So you often find that a tenor melody will need to be quite nicely spaced from the bass part. That's another reason why you have to think practically about, well, is it possible for me to play notes like this in the right hand? And when you look at this, you think, yeah, actually, that's perfectly possible. So thinking practically about how you're going to allocate that. And sometimes when you've got a melody in the middle of the texture, it's nice to think about what's happening around that, so that maybe we've got sort of three different aspects going on. In this case, you've got this bass line that's just plodding along, putting a note in each half of the bar, the measure, and then just a little more activity on the approach to a cadence. That's often the case. It underpins the harmony, is giving you a nice secure bass line, but we've got this syncopated rhythm featuring in the accompaniment. So a kind of sustained singing melody in the middle, a slow moving bass line underpinning everything, and then a syncopated accompaniment. So you've got these three ingredients making for those three levels of musical interest. And then making sure that it's a singing melody that's perfectly playable. So those are the challenges for both the pianist and for the composer. But it's worth taking them on. If you're a pianist, learning to analyze the pieces that you're playing and thinking, where is the melody at any given point, if it's that kind of piece that contains a melodic line, and then learning to kind of allocate between the hands, learning to balance your textures and so on, so the melody can sing out. If you're a composer, thinking about, there's another way of presenting a melodic line in the texture, putting it in the middle somewhere, but what are some of the challenges that we've got to deal with in doing that? Well, if you've enjoyed this video, let me invite you on a tour of the Music Matters website. It's a real Aladdin's cave for musicians, and we are all about empowering the musician. So lots of people can play, but there's a whole load of stuff they don't know about with the music that they're playing. That got to be a bit frustrating after a while, and you might think, you know, now is the time for me to knuckle down and just get a bit better at some of these associated all-round musical skills. So go to the website www.mmcourses.co.uk, and if you're a keyboard player saying, yeah, well, you know, I can kind of play stuff, but maybe my sight reading's not fabulous, maybe I don't really understand what's going on with chords and so on, have a look at our keyboard harmony course, because that will really help you to understand chords, what's going on, learn to play chords in lots of different keys, learn about cadences, learn about chord progressions, learn about unusual chords, what we call chromatic chords. It will really empower your reading and really empower your understanding of the music, which in turn will help you to come up with a convincing interpretation that's painting what's going on in the music. So it's a really important musical skill for you. And if you're a composer, coming at this from the point of view of the keyboard is such a useful compositional tool, whether you're really a keyboard player or you're not. It's such a good way of going about things. So let me wholeheartedly recommend to you the keyboard harmony course that you'll find there. Lots of other courses, lots of other exciting things that you can be a part of as well. So have a good look round and see what's going to be really useful to you. www.mmcourses.co.uk